Hey guys, welcome to Solo ReacTalk. Today I'm going to be reacting to Star Wars vs. Warhammer 40K episode 20 on Death. Where is your sting? Oh, Death. Sorry, not on Death. I wrote here on. Oh, Death. Where is your sting? Made by AFanWithTooMuchTime. Remember guys, if you want to check out my previous reactions to the other episodes, the playlist card is going to be at the top. Just click on it and be able to access them. If you want to check out the original video as well as AFanWithTooMuchTime's YouTube channel, the links are in the description below. Last week, episode 19, Silent Night, Anakin Skywalker has been captured by a Sister of Silence, and he is going to probably be interrogated by the Sister of Silence and an Inquisitor that's apparently aboard the vessel. The Wreckers are off to go and retrieve information. R2-D2 is trying to save Anakin Skywalker. So yeah, that's a very difficult and dicey situation for the Star Wars side, you know, Anakin Skywalker side. And we also had a communique from one of the secretariats of the War Master Lord Tyranius, discussing about the Calambrian soldiers that are on New Cadia, or otherwise known as Axiom, discussing that, you know, most of them won't join the War Master's side. I'm not entirely sure what the War Master is planning to do, but this secretariat was just telling the War Master that many of them are going to die on New Cadia and we don't need to worry about them. Those that survive, we will try to use them for other purposes in whatever they're planning to do. I'm not sure. So that's another developing story that we're going to be focusing on probably in this episode or the next episode. I'm not sure. I'm not sure when is it going to, you know, come to the fore. But yeah, essentially that's what happened in episode 19, and now we are continuing with episode 20. 3, 2, 1, go.
The sound of the rifle was muted, the rain more than masking the rasp of the round being loaded into it and locked into place. Not that the Calambrian marksman was anywhere near enough to an enemy to be overheard. "O Death, where is your sting? O Horus, where is your victory?"
Is this guy talking to his gun? Okay.
said Joseph, the words of his faith flowing freely under his breath as his grim work was done. He sighted down the powerful scope, lenses kept religiously clean by his care and rewarding him with a crisp and clear line of sight on the replique soldiers who guarded the three-legged walker tanks.
Yeah, this guy's reminding me of someone in Dragon Age Inquisition. What was his name again? Varric. Yes, Varric. He has a crossbow that he calls Bianca. And he talks to Bianca, he serenades to Bianca, he sings, you know, he does all these things with Bianca as if he's in a relationship with Bianca. So I'm thinking this sniper guy is just the same. Where he treasures this weapon, he talks to this weapon, you know, it also calms him down, you know, to be talking and to be saying these interesting things of, you know, oh death, where is your sting? Okay, let's continue.
They had yellow markings over their white armors and held what looked like flamers and melt-a-guns. The sting of death is but sin, and the strength of sin is the law of the Xenos. He whispered, eyes searching. He held more of the large rounds between his fingers, even as he used his arms to brace and aim the massive rifle. When the time came, the enemy would not know him as a sniper. They would know him as Death, as the Orcs had known him, as the Tyranids had before them. Joseph came from a long line of marksmen, and they had refined their skills to the point of obsession. Even now, Joseph expected, his son Ezekiel was back with the rest of the Calambian tugs and conveyors, being seen to a new home, assembling and disassembling his rifle, all the while dreaming of the day he could drill in earnest once more. But Joseph pushed thoughts of his son and family down, keeping his focus on the words of the Akasha and on his search for his target. He found it only a few seconds later, hovering near the back lines on some kind of floating sled. The massive tank that these flame troopers were using to reload and refuel their weapons. The sniper felt his lips quirk slightly. He had been uncertain that he'd be able to spot it from his current position, low as it was, but smothered his enthusiasm as soon as it flared up.
Sorry, I finished my time. I didn't know that the clones also had like a flamer unit. Yeah, that's new to me actually. I didn't know that they had flamer units.
Founder only condoned the taking of Xenos life, and, say what you will, these replicae were human. Their deaths were a tragic necessity. He aimed his sights for the center of the fuel tank and braced himself carefully. The round he had loaded into his anti-material rifle was tremendously explosive all on its own, and every shot from the nearly 6-foot-long weapon kicked like an Ogren's Ripper gun. He was lying flat against the ground, his rappel ropes pooled around him. But thanks be to the Founder, who bestows on us victory through our Lord Leto the God Emperor. The Calambian whispered to himself, the words of the Akasha a calming salve on his sizzling nerves. He had been tasked with coming to this place with his spotter, who had fallen to his death as they had scaled the side of the massive park platform.
How unlucky. Bad way to go.
But it was not the death of his friend which had him so shaken. He'd grieve later. He'd have to. It also wasn't the knowledge that, if he got careless, his gun's recoil could kick him off the ledge, or even that his shots would be visible and loud, drawing all of the enemy's attention to his admittedly distant location. It was that his shot would signal the start of Major Lazarus's plan. That at the sound of his gun, the rest of the Calambian Patriots would begin their last-ditch effort to destroy the sniper tanks and secure some kind of evac from the devils barking orders back at high command. He'd never had so much responsibility heaped onto him, never been so crucial in the start of an operation, not like this at least. Were they all in place, all ready for the mission to begin? He checked his chrono and clenched his teeth. The allotted time had come and was rapidly passing. The combined survivors at the bridge were, even then, doing all they could to hold the bulk of the enemy's attention. Joseph steeled himself, leaning into his rifle. He would simply need to have faith that directly across the vast distance to the opposite side of the park platform, his brothers and sisters in arms were ready, hanging by their own rappels, prepared to come over the lip, guns blazing. "Oh, Death, where is your sting?" he asked his rifle. The man squeezed a nearly numb finger around the gun's warm trigger, and his weapon loyally answered the question with a single, thundering shout. It spoke the language of ruin, of annihilation and finality, its breath the exhalation of death's response.
What is going on here? Is that what happens when an anti-material gun shoots? Like it looks like disintegration or something else. I'm not entirely sure. Like there's this orange fluid just flowing out. Like I see this fire, right? And then there's like an orange fluid. I'm not sure what that is. Yeah, Kubik, what are you describing here? Like what is going on here? Oh, but the clone troops are really dying. Wow.
Here spoke the rifle, and in its wake the Reaper did sing. Death was everywhere, raining in and around them in all its various forms. The Replique soldiers had blown down most of the Imperial barricades, but had found their intended massacre stifled by the deep trenches the Kriegers had edged out of the false earth of the park. Cadians, Kriegers, and all others who had managed to survive this long, crowded shoulder to shoulder with comrades and corpses, guns bristling from their jagged trench lines. The Republic's toy soldiers had been set on pelting them from a distance, but after seeing how ineffective this was and feeling how hard Imperial munitions could punch back, had chosen to roll over them in a rush of bodies and blasters instead. The troopers were infuriated, roaring in their helmets as they closed in, blasters blazing blue like neutron stars. Initially, all 13 had been able to manage was to jam himself between Julian and Emiliana.
Good to see you again, 1313.
Single arm thrust out with his hell pistol held aloft. From that position, he had managed to fell 3 of the incoming Replique before a blue bolt took him in the face. The glancing shot sufficient to knock him from the line and out of the waking world. For a time, a long time, or a brief time, there was simply cool, calm nothing. No cares, no compulsions, no thoughts at all. And then, searing pain paired with the touch of life. 13 gasped, dragging fresh air into his lungs and almost screaming it out right away.
Man, you took it in the face and you're still alive? Oh, gosh.
He tried to rise, tried to bring his hand up to his burning face, but was held down. Through the haze of his pain, he barely made out Jackna's face, her violet eyes staring down into his. She yanked a syringe out of his chest, and he barely felt the spine-chilling sensation through the agony racking his face. He could feel the cold air and rain on his skin and against his wound, ripping screams out of his mouth. "Hold still! Damn it, 13! Hold still! You're going to lose a whole lot more than your eye!" She yelled through the din of battle and his own voice.
So his eye is gone. Oi, the guy loses his arm and now he's losing an eye as well. And part of his face probably.
Registered her order, clamping his teeth shut almost over his tongue and groaning beneath her, trying to go limp to let her work. The ground trembled as explosives went off near their trench, Jackna covering his face with her body and shielding him from the rain of mud and blood which followed, before backing off and continuing the work. His fingers dug into the churned, wet soil, toes flexing and clawing the insides of his boots as she worked over his ruined eye with surgical gear, each snip and cut sending flashes up his skull and pain into his very soul. He almost wished she'd just kill him instead and allow him to return to nothing. But
I mean, it's pain that you just can't imagine. You have to experience it. You know, that kind of pain. You just can't imagine it.
something in him kept the desire from being quite as genuine as it would have been before. Though it felt like an eternity, Jackna finally concluded her work, flicking away a bloody ball of something 13 tried not to think about, before using some kind of spray on the burnt parts of his face. Right away he sighed, twitching limbs easing up and going still, letting him catch his breath and recover for a brief time as she wrapped her work in bandages, tying them off tightly.
Guys, imagine, they just flick off your eyeball like it's nothing. Yo, I would be so heartbroken. I would be so heartbroken. Like, that's my eye, guys. That's my eye. It's mine. It was in here and now it's popped out and it's been flicked away like it's just a waste.
My gun. 13 muttered as she pulled away. The medic frowned for a moment, as if she did not quite understand him, before she made sense of his words and laughed, taking a moment to fish the pistol from some place beside her. She didn't hand it to him, instead sliding it into the holster at his side. "Don't move, you plank," she told him. "You're barely holding together, and I doubt your heart can take another stim of any kind. Just sit tight and try not to get shot anymore." She had started to say, but as she did, 13 saw something terrible. Above her he could see the lip of their trench, and, standing there, having just arrived, was a replique of the Republic, shouldering its gun and preparing to fire. He reacted without thinking, grabbing Jackna by the arm and throwing her away as he rolled. The enemy trooper fired, catching the medic's left arm instead of her back. The shot hit dead on, and the woman screamed as the unguarded limb was blown clean off. She curled around the stump of her lost arm, going still shortly after, and 13 knew not if she had died from shock or merely lost consciousness. And he...
Guys, can blaster weapons amputate you like that? Man, I've never seen that in Star Wars. Oh, that's crazy. Or maybe it's because it's, you know, a far more highly powerful kind of blaster weapon, you know, because of this specific mission that they're on. You know, the clone troops were given far more powerful blaster weapons. Yeah, but yeah, that's just terrible. Your arm just blown off clean, just like that.
He had no time to find out. He rolled in the mud, fumbling to draw his returned firearm, but not managing to pull it free before the Republic trooper had sighted him and fired. The trooper only scored a near miss, as its shoulder and most of the back of its head were blown into a red rain by a close-quarters blast from Julian's shotgun. 13 was grateful, but there was not even a moment for a brief thanks as more of the replique arrived at the lip, firing down all along the line. Julian discharged his shotgun into another clone looming over them, and 13, pistol now in his hands again, covered him by lancing 2 holes in another soldier that was attempting the very same thing on Julian. When a third warrior emerged from the raining gloom of their trench line, the Cadian greeted it with an empty shotgun pitched right into its face. 13 finished that one as well, putting 3 holes in its chest, but not before it tossed a present of its own into their trench, a grenade. Julian dove to the ground, scrambling for it and grasping it with cold hands. He rose and reared high to pitch the damn thing when it went off, still clutched in his hand. Julian's body seemed to pop, smearing his blood, bones, and armor across the trench, and only narrowly avoiding 13, who was already on the ground. His head was ringing from the pressure of the blast, and he could barely make out what was happening around him with his one remaining eye. Was Emiliana still alive? Was anyone? He groaned, feeling the rain washing the mud and blood off of his face and bandages as he rose to his feet, feeling more than hearing the thump beside him as someone jumped down into the trench. The Imperial spun, ducking and narrowly avoiding the swung butt of a clone rifle, planting his knees into the ground as he pressed the steel end of his hell pistol into the replique's chest, and fired, creating holes in the enemy soldier. But it was not the only one. 13 spun again, pressing himself against the side of the trench and barely avoiding a cascading line of death issued by a minigun-wielding replique. The plasma weapon spat out a volley of fast bolts, scything down the trench and killing more guardsmen. 13 waited for the blaster fire to pass before leaning out, extending his one good arm to fire, and pulled the trigger. Yet his shot sailed through empty air without connecting, sent wide as another clone dove down into the trench, catching his arm and wrestling 13 down to the ground. The Krieger kicked and struggled, grunting and gritting his teeth as the clone elbowed him in the face and forced open his hand. 13 panted, kneeing the replicate's armored torso again and again, but getting nowhere and feeling a pit open in his stomach as his gun was forced from his fingers. The replicate trooper tossed away its own cumbersome rifle, drawing its own blaster pistol as it continued to wrestle with the Krieger. 13 fought hard, but was one-armed and wounded, leaving him in a distinct disadvantage that the Republic soldier was quick to make use of. The replicate shoved its blaster pistol almost into 13's mouth before it was kicked off of him, T-visor shattering against Gregor's boot. The big man shot the enemy a few times with his lasgun and reached down, grasping the Krieger by his collar and lifting him up without apparent effort, pinning him to the wall briefly as he set the soldier upright. "Come on, kid!" he barked, having no more time to speak as he hefted his lasgun up and opened up a spray of fire, catching the minigunner just as it had begun to sweep its weapon back down towards their direction. The clone screamed and fell, body smoking as it landed atop a pile of others 2 men deep. As this was happening, replicate soldiers from behind them opened fire, cracking and shattering the flak armor Gregor wore and scorching his body badly.
Like, you kill one, they kill you. You kill 2, they still kill you. You know, you kill 4 of them, you think you're lucky, you think, okay, I can make it, and next thing a grenade just lands right at your feet. You try and pick it up, you try to throw it back, it explodes in your hand. You know, like, there is no surety that you're going to make it out of this alive. You just have to kill as many of them as possible, you know, take them down with you. Because, wow. Like, death is your best friend in this battle. Death is your best friend.
But the huge Cadian did not drop.
For the Emperor!
He bellowed, staggering around and leaning against the muddy wall as he loosed his fire against them, the scattering shots less than accurate, yet the cover in the trench affording the Republic troops little options for escape. Blue shots punched into Gregor again and again, but the man only slumped down to a sitting position once the 2 clones before him had dropped. The third managing to scramble back up and out of the trench before he followed suit. The young Krieger watched it all, mud flowing over the sides of the pits they were fighting in and streaming thickly over his arms and neck. Looking on, he could see the big man was breathing raggedly and bleeding from several wounds that 13 guessed were or would be lethal. Still, he couldn't stop himself from coming to the Cadian's defense as another clone leapt over the lip and began firing. 13 yelled, running with all the might he had left as the replicate soldier turned to face him. Feeling the long barrel of the blaster skipping and sliding along the armor on his shoulder before he impacted the trooper and slammed it into the opposite wall. They grappled, and the Krieger realized he would need help to overcome the hand-to-hand advantage the enemy had over him. Doing what he could with one arm, he eventually found that help in the form of a rigid handle pressed against the back of his arm, which was wrapped around the torso of the Republic soldier. A shovel! One of the tools which had been used to carve out the trench! Left here in the haste it had taken to get ready for the battle, now his. He loosened his grip on the enemy to grab the handle, and the trooper kicked him off in response. Instead of resisting the blow, the Krieger rolled with it, spinning as he drew the digging instrument out from behind the replicate's back and slashed it across the clone's eyes, shattering the visor there.
Never underestimate shovel skills, especially in combat. Never underestimate.
13's back hit the muddy wall with a splat, the wet earth sucking and squelching as he pulled himself back off, single arm raised. The replicate fell back, clutching its wounded eyes, and never rose again as 13 leapt atop him, shovel rising and falling as the Imperial hacked the clone to pieces. He would have kept hacking till his arm lost its strength, but 13 caught movement from the corner of his eye and spun, instinct dominating his every action as he threw the shovel end over end. That saved him from the first trooper, but not the second, who shot twice, narrowly missing him as he jumped against the opposite wall. But there was nowhere to hide, and his maneuver would have done little more than purchase seconds, were it not for the beams of light which pierced the clone's head, dropping the trooper to the ground. 13 panted hard, looking around for where the shots had come from, and taking several moments to spot the collapsed form of Emiliana, Half buried in liquid dirt, her rifle cradled in her right arm, his hell pistol clutched in her left hand. Both barrels hot and smoking. She was gasping as well, and clearly wounded, though it was hard to tell how badly. The bare-faced Krieger staggered to her and bent down to help her up, offering his hand. She grinned with a wince at the gesture, though Emiliana pushed his pistol back into his hand instead of taking it. "Guard up, 13, said the corporal, voice pained. He nodded and took the weapon, and no sooner had he that he felt a hard shot crash into the back of his shoulder, smashing the flak plate there and burning his chemically treated coat. He fell face first into the mud and spun, both he and Emiliana aiming their weapons up and firing at the 3 new clones who leered into their trench. After a few tense seconds of exchanged fire, one of the replicate died and the other 2 retreated away, tossing a grenade into their wake. The corporal sucked in a breath, but 13 acted without hesitation, sweeping his leg and kicking the round explosive into a pile of corpses several feet to their right. The 2 covered their heads and braced as the thing detonated, showering them in more blood and viscera, but otherwise not harming either. They snapped their guns up, ears ringing, almost bleeding, and waited, listening to the rain falling, battle sounding all around them.
This battlescape is so depressing. You are fighting against your opponents desperately. Your friends are dying around you. You're losing your limbs. You're losing your eyes. You're being hurt, and you're fighting in the mud. It's wet. It's cold. It's raining. This is just miserable. I think I've said this before about fighting in the rain, how terrible it could be, to be fighting in this kind of cold, drenched weather, and you're bleeding out, and you're fighting against other people. It must be a very irky and just mucky feeling. And yeah, I mean, this just I wouldn't want to fight in something like this, really. This is just a terrible situation. Oh, guys, don't join the army. If you're in the army, good luck to you. Hopefully your countries never go to war. But this is just I'm not built for this. I'm not built for this. Mentally, I don't think I could handle something like this.
Yet, as time dragged itself by, nothing more came for them. The 2 looked at each other and realized that the only sound they could hear consistently after a time was the sound of the rain. Gradually, 13 picked himself up, careful not to slip, and, with great trepidation, peeked up with his one good eye, looking over the lip of the trench. Nothing but rain and mud. "Where are they?" asked Emiliana, still laying on the ground. "Gone," said 13, turning back towards her and kneeling, holstering his gun as he began to try to help her get up to her feet. The Cadian grit her teeth and hissed, but did slowly rise, leaning against the Krieger heavily. "Gregor," she croaked through a hoarse throat. No response. "Gregor!" she yelled more loudly. "Frick! I'm still alive, Corporal." He groaned from nearby. "Jackness here, not moving." He managed to add, sounding not much better than dead. "Save your breath," Emiliana said, looking around for the rest of her squad. "Where'd they go?" she asked softly, referring to the enemy. 13 shrugged a little, ambling next to her as they began to gather the survivors near them, and put down the replicate who yet lived. At first, it seemed baffling, their sudden absence, the quiet. But slowly, 13 started to pick up on fainter sounds, and realized the most probable explanation as he did. "The Major," 13 said. "Huh?" asked the Cadian beside him. "It must be the Major," he said. She paused, listened, and then nodded, flashing a pained grin.
Major Lazarus?
"You must be right!" Lazarus would rather go round 2 with Rejulia, or request a transfer from Indricta than be where he was now.
Unfortunately, Rejulia is no longer with us. It was good times with her.
The wind tugged and teased, sometimes weak and sometimes making him feel like a plucked spider clinging onto a single string. The only reason he was here now, the one thing he wouldn't do, was let his men down. Technically, all the soldiers under his new command were his men, but Lazarus had been the head of a squad prior to his insane elevation, and those men were truly his brothers. Even as the wind tore at him, tempting his adhering boots to release the metal surface he walked on, he would not let them down.
Why do they have an American-styled flag? Yeah, it really looks like one. Interesting, very interesting.
Even as he felt brand new sensations of fear and dread poking holes in his nerves, his arms kept reeling in the rappel line, feeding it into his winding belt spool. Even as he reached the position just below the lip of the platform, belt-mounted rope and magnetic soles holding him tenuously in place as he and several thousand Calambian patriots unslung various weapons.
Calambian patriots. Okay. And they hoist an American-styled flag with the Aquila on top. Interesting.
He did not falter. At least not too much. The former sergeant bunched the muscles in his neck, keeping his eyes fixed upwards towards the gray, raining sky. His goggles kept the water out of his eyes, but obscured the shifting, indistinct forms of the clouds and made blurry the rigid, silver towers reaching for them from the edges of his vision. As little as that view provided for him, it was leagues better than looking down and awakening within himself that foregone fear which struck him whenever he found himself gazing into a far-flung abyss.
Major! Hey, Major!
Called one of the men around him, a thickly set man hefting a sniper rifle. Lazarus craned his neck to look at the corporal, only realizing the mistake of his instinct when the corner of his eye skimmed the drop below them, and just after he centered his vision on the soldier's shit-eating grin. His wounds, and particularly his freshly applied cybernetics, ached badly and ate away at his typical patience. The metal arm had been hastily grafted onto him by a cavalcade of tech priest survivors, while he was...
How is it that he gets a robotic arm, but then 1313 didn't have one? Really, that's unfair.
grateful to have the use of his burnt and now amputated arm back in his service, the trauma of the loss and the constant deep pain the sedated wound assaulted him with was another one of those things he was trying not to think about. Glaring, he locked eyes with his former corporal.
Damn you, Jackson! You better have a good reason for getting my attention!
Lazarus barked, keeping his voice from veering into a higher than dignified pitch, though only by a few scant octaves.
Sure do, Major,
said the man.
I understand the part of the plan that gets us here, behind the enemy while their cocks are swinging. I get that we gotta take down all their limping tanks to secure evac. But what I don't get is how we're even gonna get to evac when we mop them up. That main force is gonna swing around for us, tanks or no tanks, and unless we plan to jump over the ledge, I don't see where we can pull back to.
Lazarus grimaced. He knew his plan wasn't foolproof, and even though he had tried to account for this specific problem in particular, he really hoped he would not be forced to resort to it, or any other tactics more desperate and unconventional than the one he was going to execute now.
We gotta have faith that the flyboys cover us when it counts, Corporal. Stay Gumby,
the Major said back, eyes aimed skyward once more.
So, in other words, we're properly fucked whether we win or lose,
the man said back sarcastically.
Suck it up, Jackson. Whole platoon knows you've been proper fecked ever since the sisters caught you listening to Talik, said another soldier hanging nearby, just close enough to not have to yell to be heard.
Tawik? What's that?
Lazarus couldn't see Jackson's reaction to the barb, but he could hear the soft chuckling all around them and couldn't help but grin, particularly when the offended corporal snapped back.
Empire Spire does not play Talik music. You can't call literally anything played on a skier flute Talik, otherwise you're just surrendering the whole genre to fecking Xenos.
Hey, Jackson! How'd you like to join me and get saddled with a moonbeam for the duration of our time on this rock, Corporal? Lazarus asked, cutting the man off before he got too loud. He didn't see it, but Jackson shut right up, even his fresh blush washing off at the words, which he did not return. That's what I thought. That goes for the rest of you too. No more mouthing. Operation could begin any second, and it needs to come out neat and tidy if anyone is coming out of this in one piece. Regiments on the bridge are bleeding to hold the enemy's attention. We've got to make that sacrifice count. Har? Har. 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 The soldiers around him said back, falling into grim silence afterwards, broken only intermittently by light chatter. And that didn't last long. Soon they all heard it, the sound of an anti-material rifle loosing its deadly shot, and then the deafening, roaring boom of a fiery explosion. Lazarus knew he could trust the officers under him to keep the men on time and in sync with the plan.
Oh, death, where is your sting? Here it is.
But he couldn't help ordering the advance aloud in spite of that. Kill, he said, heedless of the fact that his Vox speed was silent, as were all the others turned off as a precaution to keep the enemy from detecting them. Captains and sergeants repeated the order all throughout the hanging line of readied soldiers. And as one, they activated their rappel spools, causing them to reel in hard and fast, almost tossing the men over the lip of the platform. As planned, the snipers and their spotters hit the dirt and set up, as did the heavy weapons teams, aided by the few tech priests that had accompanied them. The other advancing fire teams began to divide, racing forward as they sprinted to close the distance. As Lazarus had hoped, the loud shot and explosion had drawn all eyes and focus away from the rear of the replique's column. This bought vital seconds he and the other Calambians spent rushing for all they were worth, angling for cover and veering out of what would soon become a lethal crossfire. As soon as he slid to a stop behind a disordered stack of discarded trees, he saw the telltale blue shots that signaled that they had been spotted.
But just look at this image. Look at the Colombians, troops getting on the floor. Some of them also jumping over, and then you just see a tech priest here. This is just so entertaining, really. I know AFanWithTooMuchTime did say that even some of the tech priests came over, to fight against the clone troops. But really, it's interesting to see this happen like this. I enjoy this image. Kubik, well done here.
Before the blue bolts could even reach their resting points, the snipers and heavy weapons teams opened up, creating thunder and flashes which could shame lightning as they tore into the rear lines of the replique. Heavy stubbers, autocannons, Calambian chain guns, bolters, and a few heavy bolters trailed lines of thick projectile fire into the men and vehicles of the Republic, ripping bodies to shreds and blowing over a few of the walkers in just the opening volley. On top of that, though they were still somewhat distant, the fire teams began to pick targets, engaging with bursts of automatic and semi-automatic fire as they continued their advance, Lazarus leading their way near the front. He had half hoped that the chaos caused by their surprise assault would be enough to force a rout, or at least to keep them stumbling while they did their work. But the damned toy soldiers were clearly veterans, and they didn't scare easy. Even then they were regrouping and beginning to counterattack. But they had made a fatal flaw, one which the Imperium now fully exploited. The replica commander had assumed that the enemy lay trapped before him, and so had marched out with most of his forces. Though he had not been so foolhardy as to leave no defense behind, those troopers he had left were armed with almost exclusively flamethrowers, as Lazarus's scouting servo skulls had reported. The replicate ran around the flaming wreckage and burnt corpses of the few felled sniper tanks and the remains of the fuel tank, raising nozzles as they advanced. Lazarus raised his fist, and his command to hold and hunker down was relayed across the squads in short order. They waited, hitting the dirt or finding cover wherever they had to, until at last the first of the replicate came into effective range. Effective range of the rifles, not their own flamethrowers.
Yeah, like the flamethrower troopers have to come a considerable close, positioning to have an effect on the Imperium of Man soldiers. So yeah, they're at a disadvantage here. Yikes.
Rigid, white and yellow in the darkness and carrying explosive fuel tanks, the replicate quickly found themselves choking on bullets before long. Their pale, shell-like armor, though powerful enough to deflect some shrapnel, was far from sufficient to stop blessed Calambian rounds, cracking and bursting like civilian ceramics before the weighty touch of a hammer. The replicate yelled into their bucket-like helmets, charging through the rain of death. But precious few survived the harrowing hails of lead long enough to come into effective range of their flamethrowers.
Didn't they have like sidearms, like a pistol, a blaster pistol, instead of using the flamethrowers? Because this is just like a death march here. Charging at the enemy with your flamethrowers. You have flammable, containment on your back, and you have to come up close to them to use your flamethrowers. So they should have just used like pistols, if they had sidearm pistols, to fight against the Imperium of Man forces. But oh well.
Those that unleashed their lethal torrents of fire took grim satisfaction in hearing the screams of the Calambians they'd reached. But their pained deaths were cold comforts, for the Patriots had spread out as a matter of habit, greatly reducing the effectiveness of the Republic Flamers' spread. A few of the replicate managed to form pockets of entrenched resistance, but as holes were rent into their wider formations, the Calambians flowed in and around the defenders, boxing the troopers in and moving behind them. Lazarus surveyed the battlefield as best he could, activating his Vox speed and hearing the reports and chatter coming in from the other Calambian fighters. He was dissatisfied with how many of the men were getting hung up on those pockets of resistance, particularly given their initial advantage, but there was nothing for it. He snapped a few orders into his Vox channel, having the Patriots encircle and hammer their positions while he and the rest of the men prepared to assault the tanks. The Imperial fire support was running low on ammunition, the majority of their stockpiles having been left below to enable the rapid ascent of the heavy weapons teams on their rappel lines. Even so, they had thrashed the artillery column wickedly, and as their thundering began to die down, the advancing Patriots pushed harder, knowing that the completion of the task now fell to them. In relatively short order, the Calambians had crossed most of the way to the column. A hissed report from one of the snipers informed Lazarus that the main body of the Republic forces was starting to attempt a haphazard disengagement, presumably having noticed the ambush. It didn't matter, he knew. The toy soldiers would come back running at full speed, and they would still never reach his men in time to save their precious limping tanks. He dashed across slurries of dirt and mud, boots sucking and thumping, the rain making everything gray and hazy. Lightning and air power lit the shrouded skies with brief, bright flashes. Spinning, tumbling wrecks of dying war machines fell from the weeping void above, trailing flames like falling torches. Their impacts rattled the platform, spreading promethium fires across the scorched park grounds, though nowhere close to the Major himself. Ahead of him, the silhouettes of the sniper tanks, both those still standing and those which had fallen, became clearer and clearer, lit both by the flames coating the wreckage of the latter and the vicious gleam of the continuous artillery fire of the former. He ducked and wove around 2 bright blue bolts, and went aground, sliding in the dirt and coming to rest behind a pair of horse corpses, the remains of some of the earlier Rough Riders. The blue bolts belted and jostled the heavy, augmented cadavers, but the former mounts held their integrity for now. Ignoring the vicious throbbing of his wounds, Lazarus waved 2 fire teams over toward his position, radioing them to send their heavy armaments. Moments later, 3 Calambians with missile tubes had made their way over to him. "What pattern are those weapons?" Lazarus asked them, his back pressed tightly against the cold carcasses that made up his cover.
I'm just wondering, the clone troopers, they only have the 3-legged sniper tanks. Don't they have like the, what is it, like 6-legged or 8-legged tanks on the battlefield as well, and also the 2-legged ones? I forgot what they call them. Yeah. But you know the ones I'm talking about, guys. I'm just wondering, don't they have those tanks as well? Aren't they there to back up and protect the sniper 3-legged tanks? Yeah, I'm just wondering about that.
"Tread feathers," said one, a woman with blonde hair streaked over her face and between her eyes. "Tread what?" Lazarus asked, taking a moment to pop up, using his last pistol to send a few lances of light toward the enemy just to keep their heads down. "Tread feathers," she repeated, unslinging the compact
What are you saying, lady?
launcher and presenting it as if to show it off. She certainly seemed smug enough about it. "Lightest guided launchers in the fleet," she said proudly. "Stole a whole crate full of them from," she began. "Shut it! I don't want to know! Those slims loaded with crack missiles?" the Major snapped. The Patriot pulled her weapon back towards her and grinned broadly. "Har, just as ordered. Outstanding! Take your shots. I want each of you to take aim at the 3rd leg of one of those limping tanks. Knock the big steel bastards over!" Lazarus ordered. "Yes, sir!" she said, before proceeding to take a knee, along with the 2 others, bracing their weapons and aiming carefully.
She loves her weapons, clearly. I mean, in a time like this, you're going to be talking about how you appreciate this weapon at a time like this. Oh gosh, she likes this weapon, definitely.
Lazarus and his immediate squad poked over their makeshift barricade and opened fire, covering the 3 Calambians as they lined up their shots. "3 made-to-order metal circumcisions on the way!" shouted the launcher-bearing Calambian. Smoke, fire, and buckling steel followed the jibe, and one by one, the formidable 3-legged tanks of the Republic began to topple and burn.
R. Okay, guys, before AFanWithTooMuchTime speaks, this was Star Wars vs. Warhammer 40K Episode 20, Oh Death. Where is your sting? Made by AFanWithTooMuchTime. Yes, 1313. Well, okay, let's just say this. We're back on Axiom. We're back on the battlefield. Yes, 1313 and, you know, the Acadian troops that were with him have been fighting for their lives against the clone troops, and some of their comrades have been killed, you know, in very, you know, just terrible ways. unlucky ways. But you know, he's still alive, even though he's lost his eye, lost his arm. You know, many of his comrades have also lost their limbs in this battle, and you know, they're fighting in very terrible conditions. I've said this before about the rain, the cold, the mud, you know, all of this wetness and just muck and blood and bones and all these dead bodies and everything. It's just a hellish landscape, and I just would not wish anyone to experience something like this. You know, it's a terrible, mental breaking, you know, situation to be going through something like that. So yeah, they had a lucky break because of Major Lazarus and his plans, you know, taking out the three-legged artillery tanks that the clone troops have. And you know, Major Lazarus with his Calambrian patriots, you know, coming here with their guns and, you know, their flags, and there was also some tech priests there as well who were, you know, joining in on the battlefield. I really do like that image that Kubek made there, you know, showing some of the soldiers on the floor, you know, taking their sniping positions, and then you just see one you know, tech priest also coming in there with his gun, taking shots at the enemy. So yeah, that was quite interesting and funny to look at. And yeah, you know, the clone troops were caught back-footed on this operation here. Flamethrowers out on the open battlefield against, you know, troops that had long-range weapons like snipers, like rifles. It's just a bad situation just occurring right there, you know, for the flame troopers. They should have retreated. They should not have went on ahead to fight against the Imperium of Man forces. They should have taken cover. They should have made like a retreat, maybe switch their weapons, get out a pistol, and then you can proceed forward, but you know, cautiously. But yeah, they're out, and Joseph, the sniper, you know, who serenades to his weapon before he shoots. Yeah, his mission is complete, although he lost his what was it, like a targeter? I think he was a targeter. Yeah, he died, but he completed the mission. And yeah, it's still back and forth on Axiom. There is no clear victory for whichever side, whether it's the Warhammer side or whether it's the Star Wars side. There is no clear victory just yet. They're still fighting each other back and forth. So yeah, that was it. That was a nice episode 20. After all those episodes, you know, of dealing with Jedis and librarians and Sisters of Silence, you know, now we're back on Axiom, dealing with, you could say, normal people, you know, fighting with their weapons and using their tactics to have one up on the other, on the opponent. So yeah, it's good to be back. But guys, that's it. That's it for today with episode 20. Remember, if you want to check out the original video as well as the AFanWithTooMuchTime's YouTube channel, the links are in the description below. If you like my reaction, please give me a like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. Click on the notification bell if you want to be up to date with my latest videos. And let us continue with A Fan with Too Much Time.